Let me break down the music business where it started. In the late 1800s, and I'm doing this on purpose so you understand where commercialization comes in. Because once you kind of understand where commercialization comes in, it starts explaining the concepts of publishing. It starts explaining the concepts of distribution. It starts explaining all these concepts. With everything that's complicated, when you find it there, you always have to ask yourself, how did it start? Now, when you ask yourself, how did it start, you find that there's one person and whatever that thing was. So this guy called Thomas Edison, in the late 1800s, he created what they call a phonograph or whatever they call it. Yeah, don't know whether it's a phonograph. It's definitely not a pornograph, but like it's a phonograph. So what a phonograph is, it's literally like it's like them old vinyls that you see in them old movies where like there's like this big speaker that looks like a trumpet, like whatever, and you could play that. Now, they were trying to literally commercialize selling this phonograph, right? But while they were trying to do that, music was sold as cue sheets. So they were never selling music like, here's a song, whatever, whatever. You literally had to, someone was selling cue sheets, and a person would play the cue sheets like the piano, blah, 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 and then when they play that, they'd record it, and they'd play it on the phonograph, right? So with Thomas Edison and them, they were trying to sell the phonograph, but they were struggling because it's this big piece of thing. And each phonograph literally has its own song. So for you to get different songs, you got to buy different phonographs, right? It doesn't make sense. It's too bulked in. So what happens is that someone figures it out later on. Cue sheets, remember, cue sheets is how you're selling a record this time. It's just a piece of paper. So music was music. You had to know the notes. So what happens is that someone figures out that, like, wait, what if we sell the thing inside the phonograph and we make different versions of that? Now, Thomas Edison is out of this, and the label Columbia, which has been the longest existing label out in the market, I'm sure you know Columbia, they were also involved in like buying into this idea in the late 1800s of the phonograph. So someone decides, hey, there's something that we could play. They never called it even a vinyl then, but it was sort of a vinyl type of thing, which now you can play different ones. And then what happens is that this thing starts becoming the thing that people start selling. So people are still selling cue sheets, and at the same time they also and at the same time playing these cue sheets, and now you can have different songs from these cue sheets, right? So that's the commercialization of music. And what these guys who are called publishers do, publishers start hiring people who can write on cue sheets, right? So they start hiring people who can write on cue sheets, and they hire them whether like it's a job. But publishers own the rights to what you've written. And then they give them to artists to also start singing. So the artists then start singing these songs, and the artists also kind of get paid something for singing, or maybe the artist also gets signed as an artist deal or whatever the case be. So essentially, there's already three phases of it. There's the publisher hires the writer, and the writer writes. Because a lot of people literally, like I said, the greatest musicians don't have the greatest talent. The greatest people were the writers who literally were commissioned to write. And then the publisher said, thank you, here's your salary, boom. Singer, you're the one that looks good for this, and you sound good for that. That's how that happens, right? Now, after World War I, I'm giving you the history lesson. It's real, right? It's not what you came here for, but you gotta know where this shit started, so you know where you fit in. It's like with your ancestors. You gotta know your ancestors, so you know why you are weak, strong, whatever. All these things are connected. History is very important. So what happens now after World War I, the cue sheet starts dying out, and also to a certain extent, these vinyls, they not really like have the best quality because the radio starts coming in. So radio starts becoming a factor. I mean, radio only started popping, commercial radio, like early 1920s, right? So commercial radio starts popping in early 1920s. When commercial radio starts popping in, this is what happens with radio and records. Records now are selling, but radio doesn't have music, right? So now you find there's a company called CBS, one of the companies, CBS. CBS start collaborating with the Columbias of the world because now they're labels who are selling these vinyls or whatever. So now they start collaborating and they start becoming like one company or whatever. And all this establishment of EMI, all these things start happening around then. Now all of a sudden, when the top 10 literally like has of the most played songs is out there, it's songs that the relationship between a Columbia, we're going to use Columbia as an example, slash EMI and CBS. The top 10 are only the artists that these guys have created. Now this starts creating the power of what we know as the major. So this whole conversation where people go, yeah, major radio work together. It's not a far-fetched concept because this is how radio became successful. In order for people to keep listening to radio, the guys who create the music had to collaborate and they merged and they formed like companies together. Now here comes the disruption. Here comes the underdogs. All the time when the charts come out, this is like the 1940s, 50s. All the time when the charts come out, the top 10 is always an artist that Columbia knows and CBS knows, meaning that it's one of their artists in this affiliation. And this is when Abu Frank Sinatra and them are killing it with the jazz, But in the background, there's this thing called rock and roll that's disruptive. Rock and roll is like rap music, trap music at the same time. They're like, yo, man, forget that rock and roll stuff. That's some old, that's a fad. Now, this is the birth of the indies. Because the majors literally like go, nah, we've got it figured out. This Frank Sinatra type of music, this stuff is going to be going on forever. But what rock and roll is doing is speaking to young people. So, the Frank Sinatras are like, I would say in our time, maybe if we had to say, like, who was a dope rapper in my time? Maybe let's say a dope rapper in my time was Ja Rule, right? Just so we broad, Ja Rule, 50 Cent, Jay-Z. I mean, I don't think that the kids today relate to Ja Rule, 50 Cent, or Jay-Z. They don't. So what Frank Sinatra and them become, they become like Ja Rule and Jay-Z for the kids who start gravitating to rock and roll. So because the kids, and I keep saying this, the kids literally hold the world like this. When the kids say this is what's happening, you better know that's where the future's going, So because the kids are now holding rock and roll like this, all of a sudden, these charts start having names that like the Columbias and the radios and the CBSs of the world don't know. How? Who are these guys? We thought this was a fad. All these guys, these rock and roll guys, and I'm also trying to manage your concept of I'm independent. Ain't nothing new about that. Been happening. So what happens is that like these rock and roll guys literally like start disrupting. They start disrupting, and I must say, yes, don't worry. When I say rock and roll, mostly black music, black rock and roll, right? So be comfortable with it. And obviously because of that, like I must add that guys like Elvis Presley started copying that thing. And, I say it even today. If I get a beatboxer from Soweto and a beatboxer from Bryanston, literally like, it's always dope when someone who is not expected from a culture does something well from a culture he doesn't belong in. And they normally give those guys the money. But the point is that rock and roll comes in. And when rock and roll comes in, these guys from these labels start seeing these charts. And they're like, yo, damn, Who are these guys? What are these guys? Now this makes the indies kind of start coming in. The independents now are doing well without any support from the majors. The majors, remember, it's always been about survival. The majors who were small in the beginning go, well, when we were selling records on our own, in order to survive, we merged with radio. And radio said, in order for us to be relevant, we merged with music. Now they're going, if we don't switch up, we won't be around. We need to start getting into this rock and roll. So they don't start getting into rock and roll by creating their own rock and roll groups. They go to the guys that are successful and they start buying those guys out. Then those guys move from independent to major. As all this is unfolding, it's literally in a way writing the future of how majors are going to exist for the next 100 years. Because Columbia has been around for like over 100 years right now. EMI has been around for like maybe like 80, 90 years right now, right? And you ask yourself, with our local labels or independent labels, you hardly see them surviving for more than 3 or 4 years, right? So what these guys did through the art of collaboration, through the art of data seeing that, hey, these guys are interrupting us in the billboards. What are we doing? Maybe it's worth a while to start buying into that. Then they buy into that. Essentially, this is how the longevity of majors stays, where majors now don't even need to develop you. All majors need to do, they need to look at the data and go, what's the new genre that's popping? Or is it hip-hop? Or is it kwaito? Or is it house? Or is it this? And then they go, call the guys that are leading it. We've got the checks to sign them in, right? This is how this industry that you want to get into was developed. It was developed through collaboration, through merging, obviously, and through data that informed how they moved. And for every one of these layers, if the contract started with 1 page, there was another 3 pages added. If the contract started with 3, there was another 3 pages. So it started, so just to be precise, it started with publishers. It started with cue sheets, which your people still write music. Your cue sheets right today are your lyrics, so even whatever you've written that people are playing, right? It started with like the guys who are literally trying to sell the vinyl, the record. It started with the radio. And now all of a sudden, obviously when TV comes in, where do we take this stuff? We take it to television, which is very much the relationship that's the same, because it's the same companies that also own some of the networks, right? Globally, not in South Africa specifically. So you see all those things. When you get in a deal with anybody of these guys, with any one of these guys, you're getting into a layer of this type of history. You know what I mean? That means that if you are going to go walk into a deal and the last thing you're thinking of is the contract and what the contract looks like, because like the local labels are all affiliates of the global labels, that means that you're ignoring the history of why you've got the contract you have in front of you. So I'm hoping that like giving you context of where the music industry comes from, you got to see it as a small thing that started from one small thing and evolved. And it took almost like 120 years for it to get to where it is today, right? And the most interesting thing about music is that music is probably the only thing that like that its access, how you access is in the past 15 years has changed dramatically. From tape, vinyl, tape, CD, MP3, streaming. In the past 15 years, music is the only thing that like how it's been accessed has changed drastically. And now, look now when we're into streaming, all of a sudden there's a new player. It was the guy that's selling you computers. The guys that are selling you computers now are now the players. Now you got to look at what does the contract mean for the guy that was selling you computers? For the guy that literally like is selling you the publisher, which is the publisher. I'm talking about iTunes. I'm talking about like what is it? Spotify. You know. Now you got to. Now there's a new layer. There's a new layer on that, which means that there are a couple of new pages on the contract that you need to look at. So, where the hell does the music come in? Does anyone know? I'm gonna drink some water while y'all think about it. I always want to think about it, you know?
So I think to answer your question, sir, the music comes in as an important part because it's the product in essence. It's the foundation. Without the music, there is no industry to discuss. There aren't any contracts to sign. There aren't any publishers to publish. There aren't any artists to make music really because that music is the product. So that's where it comes in, I think.
Okay, cool. It was a rhetorical question, but cool. um, you got a valid point though, but you'll get at me just now. Um, so, I mean, all I wanted to do is just give context on when people talk about the music industry.